On today's episode of Saka Is That So, we're going to be talking about the misconceptions around entrepreneurship. You know, everyone has this idea that entrepreneurs have all this free time. They get to work on things that only they want to work on. And, there's a few different components of being an entrepreneur that not many people actually think about. So, Ethel, in your experience, what are some of the misconceptions around entrepreneurship that you've seen based on your company's growth and trajectory?
Cool. So firstly, thanks for having me on your podcast. And a few of those misconceptions are just because you have an idea, it's going to work. And like that people want your idea to work. That you're going to gain lots of friends because you'll be socializing all the time. But in order to make that idea or that dream happen, there's so much logistics that happens behind the scene that you have to drive, which is why entrepreneurs typically work 80 plus hour weeks because there's so many other little fiddly parts that you have to do. People imagine I can go out and meet my friends whenever I want, whatever. But the times that I'm usually free, my friends are at work. Yeah. When my friends want to socialize, I usually have an event that I've put on or that I'm networking, meeting people and trying to make things happen behind the scenes. So I think there's a lot of misconceptions about how easy it is or about why people work so much because people like just outsource it. You can throw money at things, but until you're sure that things actually have people want it and people will pay for what you want, there's no point.
So what are some of those fiddly parts that you mentioned then? So some of the logistical things, should I say, that you have to put in place in order for you to be able to bring your mission out there into the world in order to see if people even want that or not? What are some of those things that you have to do?
Cool. So for example, with our platform, it's all about connecting Black communities and we're targeting millennials around the major cities of the world, starting in London. So in London, we have to understand what those millennials want. So that's research, right? That's speaking to people. That's having conversations with people who've done that research or who are working with millennials. That is speaking to young people themselves or speaking to people who are our age and going to their events, finding out what are people doing anyway? What is it that people really want? How do they want to be connected? It seems like a simple phrase when you see someone's business proposal, but that's probably at least 30 hours of meeting people and research and finding the people doing that work. And then you have managing what's the content that's going to go out? Who are the people we want to feature? Do we need to contact them to make sure they want to be featured? Some people don't. Yeah. And some people don't want to be featured on your platform, but they have their different specs. And then there's also meeting people. So the people who've been supporting us, our partners, if we want to put on an event, that's meeting the venue, that's figuring out what does Eventbrite look like to people? What's the image we're going to put on Eventbrite? What does our newsletter look like so people know what that event is going on? How do our partners know what we need if we don't talk to them? And it's not just a phone call, it's not just an email. Sometimes people are like, come in, let's chat about that. How do we work together long term or short term or mid term? And these are all conversations that take time.
Yeah.
And it's all logistics, right?
Yeah, that's a very big pressure on your time. When I really think about that, you're required to do all these administrative tasks, but you're also supposed to motivate your employees. You're also supposed to, talk to your investors and make them happy. It seems like there's a lot of pressure on your time. Yeah. And that's something that I struggle with personally, when I undergo my entrepreneurial endeavors. How exactly do I make sure I'm using my time in the most efficient way possible to make whatever mission I'd like to, bring into the world something that's fruitful and something that's sustainable? Would you say that, you're working, 80, 100-hour weeks sort of thing? Because a lot of people think that entrepreneurs are only, working 40, 50 hours or they can outsource it and whatnot. But I mean, talk about the demands on your time and how you allocate it.
I feel hesitant to say 80 to 100 hours a week, but if we think about every aspect of what we do needs to be thought about in terms of why are we doing that? What's the framework around it? How does that impact? So I think thinking takes a lot of time, which people isn't always accounted for. So I'd say somewhere around that. I'd say 70 plus.
Okay.
because you can be having a simple conversation that becomes a work conversation, that becomes a personal conversation. Like entrepreneurship isn't that thing that I turn up to 9 to 5 and then leave and then I switch off my phone and I'm not doing it. Entrepreneurship is something is based around my mission and my purpose in terms of what am I trying to do. So then that intersects with every area of my life. So my relationships are feeding into it. Somebody can be talking about something completely irrelevant, but that's got me thinking about work. And on the tube, I'm thinking, wait, how do I make that thing work even better? How do we make the app something that's more attractive, for example? How do we make people understand what the community is? And everything is a form of inspiration. So
wow. So you're spending a lot of time thinking is what it sounds like. I mean,
thinking and doing.
Yeah, thinking and doing, right? You have to balance the two things out, because if you're always doing, then no one's doing the thinking. And if you're always thinking, you're never actually doing. So you have to find that balance between the two.
Exactly.
I mean, there are a lot of entrepreneurs that, for instance, Warren Buffett, for instance, he reads for 4 or 5 hours a day, right? So that he's very heavily leaning towards one aspect as opposed to the actual doing part of things. So it does differ from person to person. But something else that was interesting that I thought of in terms of entrepreneurship was the reflection on people's ages when it comes to being an entrepreneur, right? Because the conception out there is that, young people are the best entrepreneurs because they have all this free time and energy and whatnot. But I've seen a lot of the statistics show that actually the most successful entrepreneurs are those between the age of 35 and 45.
Oh, wow.
And so, that's a bit of a misconception that I had to, deal with or just deliberate. What does being a young entrepreneur mean? And do you believe or subscribe to that notion that young entrepreneurs are where it's at, or they're the ones that are likely to be most successful? And why do you think that is?
So I think not only is this subjective, right, in terms of what is the person looking to do, but going back from that, I think it's interesting to hear that the most successful entrepreneurs are between 35 to 45. As a young entrepreneur, I think a lot of people either look at you as you don't know what you're talking about. You've not had enough life experience to be creating something that's going to change the world. That's one. And some people are like, this is great. You've got all the energy. You've got to figure it out. You know what you're doing. But there's the gap in between, right? Of you can be a young entrepreneur and know exactly what you want to do because you've experienced something that makes you know and understand what the solution looks like. And you understand that, for example. But there's also young entrepreneurs who I think, or younger people who come into entrepreneurship who underestimate the journey because we don't necessarily know everything. Like, I have to be learning on the job, right? I have to be reading what are those successful entrepreneurs saying about how you manage a product, how do you take it to market, how do you sell, what is the sales, marketing, funnels, all of that. There's a lot of learning. And I think a lot of people assume that because you're a young entrepreneur, you're not going to put in the work to understand years of knowledge that other people have spent their lives like enhancing, building, etc. So I think there's a positive misconception of being young that you're going to get everything done, but also there comes a lot of people misunderstand the journey of understanding who you are and knowing yourself, because in order to do entrepreneurship well, I believe you have to have some understanding of what you stand for, like what is going to get you up in the morning, but also who are the people around you? How do you manage relationships? What are the skills that you've gained through life and you're developing them at a really rapid rate? It might not be finessing them, but you're building, you're constantly learning, and you're like, what am I missing out?
Yeah.
So we're always pushing.
That's a very good point, actually. And should age actually be a factor in terms of whether you're a successful entrepreneur or not versus the skills you have and the devotion to your mission that you have? So there's nothing particularly that says, or is a notion that, because you're this age, you'd be successful. Maybe the statistics most likely show that because someone has maybe gathered more wealth so they can actually spend more money on their endeavors. So it's more likely to be successful. Perhaps they've had the chance to acquire more skills just because they've had more years, on this planet. But there are people that are 20 years old that have gathered skills that a 45-year-old would have never gathered. It just depends on their path and how open they were to learning new skills along their way. Because doing the same job for 25 years is, one thing, and doing 5 different jobs over the span of 10 years is another thing. You come out of both of those professional experiences with different skill sets and values and missions and whatnot. So yeah, age doesn't necessarily have to be a factor in the typical way we think about it.
Definitely. And I think we should stop. I think age isn't a linear thing, right? Just because someone's been around for 20 years or someone's been around for 45 years doesn't mean their life experiences equate. In that 20 years, somebody could have seen as much as a 45-year-old or whatever has seen. And that's what determines where their path goes and what they've learned from life. And I think, but it's also important to acknowledge that skills and things and wealth are things that still need to be built up on the journey.
Perhaps it's people that have been here for a little while, understand what their mission is. They finally hone in on that one particular thing they want to do. So they're much more devoted and focused on it, as opposed
an older entrepreneur?
As an older entrepreneur, as opposed to younger entrepreneurs, whereby, we're still trying to figure things out and, we're experimenting and trying new things, which has its own benefits. But, there's something to being able to focus on one thing for an extended amount of time that makes most entrepreneurs successful, right? You can't be bouncing from one thing to the next. And so perhaps that's one reason why older people are typically more successful according to the statistics. But I don't know, it's one of those misconceptions that are out there. But that actually leads me into another point or another misconception which I've seen out there, which is primarily the fact that entrepreneurs have it all figured out, right? You see someone that's an entrepreneur, you're like, man, that person knows what they're doing, they know where they're going, if that makes sense, right? And so that's something that's typically symbolic with older people that have had more years, and so they know what they're trying to do. But that misconception of having it figured out, would you say, or how would you go about tackling that? Is that something that's the truth? You actually do have it more figured out than most people, or are you kind of just, trying to put it all together,
So I'd say there's, it's a mix of the two. I don't think all people who are older know exactly what they're trying to do or have it all figured out. I specifically don't have it all figured out, but why I'm doing stuff, I have figured out. And I think it goes back to what's your life's journey been like, and what are you determined to do? And have you, what are the decisions you're making about your future? Do you have a life goal? Do you have a life vision? Because I think that helps you figure out a rough direction of where you're going to go with life or where you want to take yourself. So I think you don't necessarily have to be older or younger, but I think there's a balance in between. Just because of someone's age, you can't determine that. It has to be, I guess, on an individual basis, but also who are the people around them? What's their community like? Do they have mentors? Do they have strong mentors? What are their mentors doing? What kind of community are they in? What's their support network like? Do they read? Where are they learning from? So I think the misconception that I think I'm still figuring stuff out, but the way that I figure stuff out is it making me the person I want to become? Is this helping build the mission that I believe I'm here to do? And is this going to help achieve or bring that vision closer of what the mission is?
So you mentioned a little bit about the, support network. So with mentors, mentees and whatnot. And, that's something I think that not many people really think about, right? Because everyone thinks entrepreneurs have it somewhat figured out and they're going along this path. But that support that you need as an entrepreneur to, psychologically be ready for it, financially be ready for it. There's a whole mentor-mentee relationship that's useful, or even friends and family, or just co-founders that you have. That whole support network is something that people don't necessarily think an entrepreneur needs, because that person seems to be figuring it out or doing it on their own. And anytime there's a publication or something, it seems like that person alone is responsible for everything happening. So I mean, how have you gone about developing your support networks as you're going along this entrepreneurial journey?
Good question. So the African proverb that says, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, you take others with you. And it takes a village to raise a child. I believe strongly in those, right? Being born in Zimbabwe, everything's around family. And I think to think that you can do something alone is, some people do, but I think it's almost futile to an end, because we're built as humans to do life in community or to do life with other people. Having a co-founder for me has been massively incredible. Giselle Frederick so our skill sets complement each other and we do things in different ways, but the ultimate thing is that we see this vision and we know what we want to build. And then we talk through the vision. How are we going to bring that to life? And knowing what we're trying to achieve. And we might do that in different ways, but because our visions are aligned and our missions are aligned, we know we can do that together. And knowing that I have that support in somebody else, even if she doesn't necessarily see things the way that I see them in that moment, I know that she's with me. Like, we're doing this together, we're partners. And I think there's so much power in knowing there's people around you supporting you. I have mentors for different things, for different areas. I can see somebody who's great in directing and governance. I think they're incredible. I will ask to learn from them because I think we can never learn too much. And with friends, I think it's important to maintain your relationships with friends, but communicating what that looks like and what those relationships, how they will change, how they're going to evolve, or just setting the expectations of, guys, I'm going to be really busy. I don't know what that looks like, but I ask you to stand with me, and you learn who your tribe are, right? Like, people either choose to do that journey with you, or some people turn away.
Yeah.
And that can be hard, but it's about knowing that, hi, I've chosen why I'm doing this. I know why I'm doing this. I know why I'm here. It's never going to be easy. Nobody said that. But knowing you've got your family around you, and I think communication is the biggest thing about taking people with you on a journey. Yeah. Communicating what you're trying to do and how you think they can help, because not everyone's going to approach you with what you need if they don't know what you're asking for, what you need at that time.
Yeah, no, that's an excellent point. There's a lot of strain on your relationships, both professionally, because, you're investing all your spare time if you have a full-time job in your entrepreneurial endeavors. So you don't actually have that time to network with your colleagues and whatnot. In terms of your family as well, that vital 6 to 10 p.m. time that you actually have to work on your business or whatever it is time taken away from, a partner or your family or your sisters and whatnot. And then there's also the demand to keep that relationship with your mentors as well, because not just from an advice perspective, but they can also, help you in terms of just giving you psychological reaffirmation of what you're doing is, you're on the right path and whatnot. So there's a lot of stress on your time. And as you rightly mentioned, some people will understand that and give you support, and other people are like, man, we never see Ethel out at the parties anymore on Friday. What's going on? She's not a friend of ours anymore. Right. Why she ditched us, And so that's a whole aspect of being an entrepreneur not many people think about. I don't want to say it consumes your life, but in order to be successful, you have to ensure that all your relationships and everything else in your life supports what you're trying to do.
It's aligned to it,
it's aligned to it, because if it's not, then you're kind of in trouble. There are other things that might take priority or precedent over your mission. And it sounds like, if you're going to spend all this time on this endeavor that you're doing or on this business, it's something that is so important to you, you're willing to make it your life's mission.
Definitely.
But another misconception that I wanted to also just bring up and get your thoughts on are, entrepreneurs are people that are primarily seen as extroverts, right? As people that are go-getters, that are out there in the news and whatnot. But some of the most successful entrepreneurs are actually introverts. They're very shy, very reticent characters. What's your experience like? Do you think entrepreneurs are more likely to be of one, psychological makeup as opposed to the other? Or what's your experience like with that like?
I think an entrepreneurship is not a one-size-fits-all. Like, there's no template to be an entrepreneur. So going back a little bit to what you were saying about friends and family, so I think it's rather than a stress, it's really about making you efficient with your time, and also helps you to prioritize who is important, why are they important, and that sounds quite business-like, but it's very much about how do I foster the environment for me, and not just for me, but for this business to grow. And if they see the vision, people go, I get it. I'm going to go with you. I know I won't see you. I'll miss you. Drop me a text sometimes, And I think that links very well into being an extrovert and an introvert. There's a great podcast by Craig Rochelle on the art of energy management.
Okay.
So I believed I was an extrovert, right? When I started, I love talking to people. I get energized speaking to people, but my energy management changed, right? Because a lot of the time, what I'm doing for the work is speaking to people, engaging with people. But that's a form of work, depending on what that looks like. in order for me to be re-energized speaking with people, I have to be with the people that I'm comfortable with, right? And no one person is an extrovert or an introvert. Like people are more of the other, but I've become more of an ambivert, right? Which is a mixture of both, where I've designed my life in such a way that I now better understand myself to say, I enjoy being with people, but is that energizing me? And sometimes, when do I need to be away from people in order to recharge and make sure I'm ready to be with my friends or to be with work or to do all of the other things that I'm trying to do and motivate people? I also need to make that time for myself. So I'm recharging more as an introvert or in isolation, as people might see it, in order to be that extrovert that I need to be for work. But not everybody needs to be. Some of the best people I've worked with are introverts, but really they work better one-to-one and they become extroverts on that one-to-one basis. So it's all about what's the mission? Why are you doing that thing that you're doing? And what's the purpose of it? Do you need to be speaking to people? Because then you can become an extrovert in that moment or for that thing. And then you can also be an introvert along with the other areas of your life. I don't know if that was clear.
Well, no, it makes sense. I mean, it's, there's different makeups in terms of what a successful entrepreneur would be like, right? You don't have to be an extrovert or an introvert. You can be an ambivert. It's actually the first time I heard that word, but that's great. And so, there's a lot of different aspects of being an entrepreneur that need to be considered, but, there's no one size fits all or make all break all, right?
Exactly.
There's room in entrepreneurship for different types of people, different ways of thinking and whatnot. But that actually leads me to another, misconception that I've thought about in terms of, everyone thinks, when you're building a team or you're creating a team, right, that you want to hire people that are just like you. If you're an alpha and a go-getter or an extrovert, you want to hire people that are just like you, right? Because you want to create that company culture and everyone needs to be the same. But the reality is you actually need people that are going to complement your skill set. So people that are actually very different from you so that they can work on the things that they'd be successful at, you know? How have you navigated that? I mean, do you have that initial bias of, I want to hire or work with people that look like me, and then you corrected or checked yourself that, no, we need complementary skill sets? How do you negotiate that topic?
Good question. So I think Giselle and I are a great example of this. I'd say I'm more extroverted than she is. But actually, our complementary skills help us see the other skills that we miss, right? So in terms of hiring our team or building the team, it's very much about what are we trying to do and what are the skills we need to do that? And then where do our skills come in? Okay, where are we falling short of that? And it's about assessing what are you trying to do? We can have all the people who think like us and tell us it's great, but then we become an echo chamber and really miss the point of trying to hear what other people's voices are or make or create a platform that really helps to amplify other people's voices, because then we're amplifying our voices personified in different ways through other people. So I think having a diversity of thought is the most important thing, and a diversity of life experience. And we might not agree with people all the time, but actually what that helps to do is reaffirm, so what is it we were thinking about this in the first place? So I think diversity of thought is really important to help direct, to keep us relevant, but also to make sure that we are evolving as people evolve and people redirect and change where they are or how they see themselves.
Yeah. I mean, speaking of these different skill sets or diverse ways of thinking that are needed to, be successful, one of the most important skill sets that people think primarily you need to have in order to be a successful entrepreneur is tech skills. You need to actually be, a coder or whatnot to create a tech company. And I myself have fallen prey to that, right? I think I need to be able to code in order to be a tech entrepreneur or in any space that you're going into, that you need to be technical in order to be successful in that realm. What's your experience with that like? Would you say that's an absolute must, or are you able to bring people on board to complement that technical skill and you can focus on the things that you're good at?
Yeah. So tech is definitely not a strong point of mine, right? For somebody who's co-founding a platform with an app, I think you don't need to understand tech. Well, or you don't need to be an expert at tech, but I think you need to be open to learning about how does it work. Giselle has a background in tech and finance, right? So she's the tech head, if we call it that. I recently learned what an API is, which is an app. Oh my gosh. Something.
Yeah, that's all
but
good.
I know what it is.
Think of it like a menu. That's what I was told. It's the simplest thing. If you want to get some information from someone else, think of it as a menu. You say, I would like this, and then they go and they fetch that and bring it for you.
Yes.
So it's a menu for you to be able to access a company's information. So yeah, I only learned about it.
Like plugins, right?
Yeah, something like that.
Something like that. But there we go. I don't understand tech, but I think it's about the willingness to learn, but also to delegate, right? Good leaders aren't people who try and do everything themselves, because we're human and there's only so much we can do. It's about how do you manage your expectations of yourself, but also do a clear inventory of this is what I'm good at, this is what I do really well, this is what I can do but really shouldn't be doing, this is what the people in my team, or these are the key areas I need help with. And then I think building on those areas through either outsourcing, through hiring people, or through working with advisors that can better support that knowledge base is so key. Don't try and learn it all. You will spend no time sleeping and every time reading, and it will make no sense.
That makes perfect sense to me. I mean, in terms of, you definitely need a support network. You need to outsource or lean on other people in order to be successful.
Yeah.
And I wanted to ask a bit more about your experience with the Google ecosystem, right?
Yeah.
Because your company Sonar was part of that. And so that ecosystem gave you that support, or they could highlight where your weaknesses are.
Yeah.
You know, if you're not a technical co-founder, then they could help you get in touch with someone that is. So, I mean, the role of ecosystems, how important has that become in, giving you the platform you need in order to be successful? Because if I was to think about it from, the outside looking in, I would think to myself, the common myth is that I don't need an accelerator or an incubator or anything to be successful, right? I can just do it on my own. But there are all these pockets of support networks that are actually out there to help you be successful. So, I mean, how was that for you? I mean, working as part of that Google ecosystem, was it really that much, more valuable to you, or could you have gone without it, if that makes sense?
So firstly, thank you to Google for Startups for hosting us within their startup ecosystem. I think it's massively invaluable. When you're working solo, you can imagine yourself working in a coffee shop, right? You get up, you go and you do your thing, but it's your thoughts, your ideas, how you think things should be done. And it's you researching all these articles, searching Google, for example, for the information that you need. But imagine that, but with people around you that are asking, how is it going? You start building almost another form of support network, right? You might not see people all the time, but you can see other people who are working in a similar track of mind, who are working on their own things. But so, for example, we have a lunch club, which is organized by different people within other members, right, of the ecosystem. And it's just a great time every other lunchtime whenever I'm around to sit there and just find out what are people working on. And sometimes we're debating about life and climate change. And do you think, what do you think about Greta Thunberg and the yacht, for example? It's all these interesting conversations that we sometimes miss out on because you're oh, I can only have them with my friends. But being able to connect with other people who are also working ridiculous hours and are trying to bring things to life. So I think, and the mentorship has been really incredible. So they have different portfolios of mentors, if that's investors in residence, people who've done the startup journey, people who are just starting as well. It's a whole spectrum of other founders and co-founders as well. I think it's just interesting being able to tell them the idea and hearing what they think about it, saying, have you thought about this? Which are things I might never have thought about, if not till 10 years down the line. So you just get all of that mashed into one. And I think it's so important to find spaces like that where you have other people to bounce off of, but also to make sure your idea is still relevant, to hear what people think.
Having that wealth of experience at a place like the Google ecosystem
Yeah.
to bounce ideas off, debate things, validate your idea and whatnot, that sounds like a great place to be. I mean, it sounds like a place that you can actually be challenged, you can actually have that support, all those ingredients that you need to, have a successful venture or entrepreneurial endeavor that you're, part of at that particular moment. And, something that comes to mind is a lot of people think that entrepreneurs or serial entrepreneurs are more successful, right? That success begets success.
Yes.
I've heard a lot of venture capitalists say, I'd rather invest in someone that's had 2 startups fail or 2 ventures fail, because I know that at some point statistically they're much more likely to succeed after learning from all those failures, right? So would you, in your experience, the people you've interacted with, is it true that most people or most successful entrepreneurs are serial repetitive entrepreneurs, or does that not really factor, or does it not matter?
I think there's truth to it, but we have to also think about how those serial entrepreneurs started. Some of them had failed startups. Some people's startups just went and people bought into it and they became successful, but they didn't necessarily imagine that to happen. That was a first try thing, right? So there's a whole mixture of what serial entrepreneurship looks like in the first place. And in order to become a serial entrepreneur, you have to start somewhere. So I think, yes, I think serial entrepreneurs are probably more likely to be successful because they found a model that works, right? But in order to find your model that works, you have to be trying stuff out as well. You have to be testing it out and throwing it out there and see what people think.
Yeah, there's an iterative process to it, right? I mean, you're not going to get success on your first endeavor. In fact, a lot of people have to pivot.
You could.
Well, you could. Not necessarily. I mean, you could. But, a lot of times people pivot. I'm not sure what Sonar started as. But, the notion that the idea you start with is the one you're going to end with. Or, exactly. That's a whole different misconception out there as well. I mean, have you had to pivot in your experience of, running Sonar?
Yeah, actually. So you were actually there at our launch, right? Which was focusing around Pan-Africanism and the 21st century and how we relate to that as the millennials today. So when we launched, we were working to be the Pan-African network. And now, as Sonar, we are a platform connecting Black communities, right? And we've taken that pivot away from Pan-Africanism, or we've kind of worked on the language and spoken to people and said, what is do you identify as Pan-African? And we realized there were some people who didn't feel, who weren't African or who weren't Black or who were like, what does it even mean? And they were our target audience. And the fact that the language made so much sense to us, but didn't make sense to our target audience was like, okay, we need to pivot. Because at the end of the day, this is about them and how they engage with us rather than just us pushing ourselves onto them.
Yeah.
So there's been so many pivots on the way. And I think it's healthy and natural. And a lot of mentors expect you to pivot. Because if you don't pivot, then are you really interacting with the market? Or are you really just pushing forward your idea and deciding it's going to work?
I see.
Because you have to work with the market environment, right? If the market environment is telling you, you need to shift something. You need to be adaptable in order to survive.
That was one of the number one things I read about entrepreneurship was that the number one reason why a lot of companies fail is because their idea is not actually required by the market.
Right.
Like you're actually creating something that only you might use or you think is important, but a lot of other people don't think so, or it's not valuable for them, or they're not willing to pay for it, right?
Yeah, exactly.
It's something that would be useful to them, but you can't make a business out of it, right? So those are two different things.
They are.
How have you navigated the landscape of, pivoting, but pivoting in such a way that's actually reactive to the market? So are you doing customer interviews? Like, how do you know when you actually need to pivot or not? Right? That's a tough one to navigate.
True. So I think, so customer interviews, speaking to people who we've engaged with either at our events, for example, or people who are on the app, asking them, hey, so what do you, now you're here on the digital community, what are your thoughts? Do you understand what you'd use this for? And some people are like, I like to message my friends, right? And you're like, cool, but do you understand the wider purpose? Like all of these stuff we're doing. So I think it's continually iterative is the word.
Okay. Yeah.
Iterative.
Yeah.
And we have to be responsive. It's a conversation, right? Like whatever service or product you're bringing is a conversation with the people you're bringing it to. And we have to be willing to listen and hear what they're saying. Otherwise, they'll just go and find something else, or who will use it.
Yeah. No, that makes perfect sense. Well, I think that's pretty much most of the things we wanted to talk about.
Sure.
Thanks for joining us on the show. Is there any message you'd like to get out there to the people?
Yeah, I think it's, I think
it could be about Sonar.
Hey.
Yeah, trying to plug you in.
Hey, thanks. Thanks for the prep. So Sonar is a platform connecting Black communities around culture, arts and heritage, wherever they are across the major cities of the world. We're all about bringing the conversation of how do, if the world is driven by who you know and where they are, why can't we democratize that? Why can't you access somebody in the middle of Kenya or in London? Obviously, we're starting in London, but if it's speaking to somebody about your question, your issue, make sure to post on the platform, download it. It's available on Play Store and App Store, and you will auto-follow Giselle and I. So make sure to drop us a message. If you have a shout out, if you want to be shouted out, let us know and we'll make sure to do that. We're also at We Are Sonar across all media channels, including LinkedIn.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Ethel. Really appreciate it.
Cool. Thank you so much for having me, Saka.
Cheers.